One of the things that people keep telling me is that once they actually read the book and they start to apply the tools of the book, the thing that they get out of it is permission to be human in a space that generally has considered humanity a liability.
When leading your team or yourself through chaos, your first instinct is usually panic. But what if that feeling of losing control isn't a sign of failure? What if it's actually a predictable, manageable part of the process? Well, hey, welcome back to Dave Wants to Know. Our guest today is Brianna Sylver, president of Sylver Consulting and author of the book, Leading Through Free Fall. The title of your book, Leading Through Free Fall, that sounds scary.
Not so much, not so scary, I would say, but more of a situation that's just predictable in a lot of ways. So, when we start off projects, initiatives, whatever they might be, personal or professional, we have a vision for what we want that to be. And usually it has some tone of it's going to be smooth sailing. Yet so much is not smooth sailing. There's always bumps and there's always turbulence, and at certain times that can feel like a free fall, particularly when you feel like you're out of control. You don't have, the concrete and tactical things to kind of hold on to and keep moving forward. So that's basically the impetus for the book title, because in today's business environment, leadership, there's a lot fewer things that we can control than what we can control. And so people are essentially leading through free fall. And the book is all around how do you lead through free fall in a way that keeps you moving forward with intention and purpose, despite not having everything all figured out.
So the title itself is more or less a metaphor for skydiving, is it not?
Yeah, I have done skydiving once. Loved
Look at
the
you.
experience. However, I can't say at the time there was any premeditation of like, oh, I'm going to write a book about this experience. Certainly not. But when we were actually writing the book, when I started that process and kind of had to move from, just really kind of getting clear about what the purpose of the book was going to be, who is going to serve, all that type of stuff. I had gotten my team together. And one of the activities that we do oftentimes with our clients is these projective types of activities. So we have these cards that have a bunch of imagery, and then we kind of use them as gateways for conversation, depending upon whatever we're working on. And so we use that exercise in the context of the book. And specifically at that time, the conversation was, what do we do as a company? What do I do as a leader that is truly unique? And through that process, this picture of skydivers, where you've got like 4 or 5 skydivers holding hands, kind of like falling through, right? And it was a metaphor for really the collaboration and the centeredness that we provide to our clients despite that. And so that just became kind of the image that became a guiding image throughout. And then the working title was always Leading Through Free Fall with, slightly different subtitles, but it just kind of stuck. And of course, then we had to pull it all the way through the whole book. So that's where you got the suiting up and the free fall and then the safe landing.
It's a great metaphor. You mentioned in the book the raw truth forged in real world trenches, and talk about some of your 20 years. Was there a specific moment where you felt like you were in a free fall and that, where this book maybe it had come out of you from, or an experience that you had?
That's a great question. I mean, the reality is I think every project and initiative that you go through has a free fall moment, at least one in them. And so my broader consulting business is working with Fortune 500 organizations to help them chart and future-proof their brands and their organizations on a broader scale. And so a lot of the work that we're part of is innovation or transformation oriented. There's an element of basically change underneath every single project that we do, whether it's sort of explicit where they're asking for the change or sort of the answer to solve a growth issue that they're having in that moment. And so, going back to my earlier comment, we all have a vision for what we want it to look like, which rarely actually happens exactly that way. And so every project goes through a free fall, but how you embrace the free fall is ultimately what makes the difference between a project that moves forward, that people activate on, versus those that maybe kind of just sort of die on the vine. It ends up being more of an exercise than a forward momentum initiative. And so for me, it was all about, wanting to really then take all of that experience for the past 20 years and really codify it into something that could really help people. Because I've always been told that the ways in which I do stakeholder engagement is net different than most others. And it took me a long time to really understand, what does that even mean? Because, obviously I just do it the way I do it. And then as I started to write this book, I realized these three distinct stages of how that happens. So the whole suiting up section of the book is really around, how do you bring alignment into what people actually want to have happen when they're starting a project or an initiative, so that you can have, and that has two purposes. One is to just get clarity, make sure everybody's fully aligned before you start on what the desired outcomes are. But then two, because we're involved in initiatives that can go months, if not years in length, depending upon the project, that sometimes you need anchor points to come back to and be like, we said we wanted, let's take innovation ambition, for instance. We said we wanted game changing innovation. And now that we're 3 months into this project, our innovation ambition looks a little bit more like me too. Maybe we need to kind of challenge ourselves a little bit, right? So they provide these anchor points. Then the free fall is like all the stuff that could happen that you could never predict it would happen, but they just kind of come out of left field. So like the first thing might be, hey, your project owner is no longer with the company. They were fired overnight, for instance. Now what do you do? Or like, let's say, you thought you had a timeline of 12 weeks to do something, and then now you only have 6. What do you do? Right? Like, so these are things that you just have to deal with them. Like you can't predict them. And then the safe landing is all really around the handoffs to like help people to really take the new and integrate it with the old to ultimately decide where do they put their energy and their investments. And then the second, just really kind of like, how do you mobilize teams, and particularly cross-functional teams, because that's an expertise that I have, of how do you get cross-functional teams to kind of work with one another.
Talked about free fall. I mean, in general, you think of free fall and you think of panic, helplessness. You're not able to control a situation. How do you coach yourself or work yourself through that helpless feeling of, my gosh, this project is twirling out of control?
Yeah, so there's lots of different ways to do that. And so I think one of the beauties of the book itself has 17 different tools and frameworks in it to kind of meet people at different stages of this free fall journey that they might be in. Some of them are really directed to the individual and the leader. Some are directed to sort of the broader team or the organization. And so, like, for instance, for the individual leader, one of the tools in the book is what I call the core value offer exercise. And this is really around helping each individual to know what is their unique superpower. So it's my belief that each person has something that makes them uniquely them. So if you had two people with the exact same expertise, exact same perspective before, it's going to be like their value is going to be different because they have sort of this extra layer over the top. And so, for instance, mine is clarity, and it's being able to really kind of, I can be in a room and be hearing a bunch of conversation. People can be talking for 10 minutes, and then I'm sort of synthesizing it real time, like, and I can say in a very pointed perspective. So this is what I'm hearing is the issue. And then everybody's like, wow, yeah. Like, and it was like a light bulb goes off, right? So, like, that's my core value offer. And so I really encourage people to tap into that for a couple different reasons. One, it helps them to just stand taller in their leadership overall, but it also helps them to stand out. And so that brings in inner confidence that allows them to have better presence when they're in front of, teams and leaders and all the other jazz. And so that's one example of an individual activity that's part of this. We've got other things around what are your core leadership values, for instance. Then there's many tools that are really about how do you help the team to process the free fall or the resistance that they are feeling in that moment.
You mentioned your superpower is clarity. How did you discover that, and how do others find out what their superpower is?
Yeah, I love that you've asked this. So it's a 5-step process to do this. So the first step I would encourage folks to do is, first of all, get a paper and pen. This is not something to be done on the computer, because it kind of, just the process of writing it out, you tap into different aspects of it for yourself. But the first thing that you do is you identify 3 to 5 moments in your life, personal or professional, where you have been sort of feeling the state of flow. So, whether that, for people who aren't familiar with that term, it's like the types of moments that you're like, gosh, like if it's a work situation, like literally get paid to do this, like that is just so cool, right? And you're just like, it's the moments when you can just sort of lose track of time, and just, kind of like you just feel like you're almost high on the love that you have for something.
Well,
So you want to identify like 3 to 5 of those moments in your life, personal or professional. And then what you want to do is you want to exhaustively write about those things using the pen and paper. So you want to, and I'm saying like write like 3, 4, 5 pages of information about each one. And you want to get as detailed as possible. Like, who was there? What were you doing? What was the outcome? What was the energy that you were feeling, that the other people were feeling, whatever it might be. But you want to kind of like fully get to the who, what, where, when, and how, aspects of that situation. And so you do that for, those 3 to 5 instances. And so I encourage people to kind of do that and then just let it sit for a day or two. Then come back with fresh eyes and go back through all of the information that you had exhaustively written about those situations. And now look at it with an analytical eye. And now it's like, use a highlighter or, a colored pen or something, and start highlighting or circling all the key patterns that start to show up. And now you want to kind of put those patterns either on post-it notes or kind of like just start to cluster them. You want to ultimately get to clusters to then say, okay, oh, these are the key things that are kind of coming up as what puts me in this state of flow. And then once you've got that, now you want to start to put a word or phrase together that kind of brings all of these things together. And so usually at this point, people will get to like maybe, 1, 3 words that feel like they could be a fit. And then you want to start to try those words on for size, is what I say. So like you want to say, like for me, for instance, when I got to clarity, like keep that in the front of my mind. And then as I go through the next week, look for instances of where that clarity is showing up, and then start to take note of those items. And then at the end of that week, look back over and say, one, is clarity the right word to really describe what I was talking about, or is it something different? And then two, what does clarity actually mean when it comes to me? And so obviously this is going to be different for each person.
how do you deal with self doubt? We all have it, and leaders must have it. They have to maybe suffer by themselves behind closed doors because they know the people out in the other room are going, what are we doing? Why are we going this? As a leader, how do you navigate that self doubt and stay focused on that goal?
This is actually part of for me personally, when I first came to create my core value offer, this was a big way to overcome that doubt because, I would be in meetings, for instance, and I would be seeing pathways like through the conversation. And I'd be thinking in my mind, like, why are we not talking about this? Like, the answer seems so obvious here. Like, but then I would be doubting myself and I'd be like, well, I wasn't part of the 5 conversations that happened before this. I'm sure somebody said this and I don't want to kind of look stupid or dumb. And so I'm just not going to say anything. And then after I did my core value offer exercise, then I realized, no, Brianna, like clarity is your superpower. And so then what I started to do is almost create little experiments for myself. So then every time I was in meetings, in the subsequent weeks where I was feeling that tension inside me, being like, why are we talking about this? Instead of just sitting there quietly, I started to speak up and I said, whatever it would be in the context, right? But I would take in my journal and I would write when I had felt that tension and when I had stepped forward and said what, I thought that was very obvious. And more times than not, people were like, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Why have we not thought about that yet? And then I realized that, yeah, like this truly is my superpower. And so by fully stepping into that, it started to erase some of that self-doubt because I was literally proving to myself and rewriting that limiting belief every time I took one of those little experiments to realize that, 9 times out of 10 it is a good thing to step for. And the 1 out of 10 times, it's not bad. It's just neutral. So, like, it's better for me to just kind of move forward. And I believe for, the other people who've gone through the core value exercise, they have a similar experience if they truly embody their word into the core of their being.
You talk about clarifying success through metrics. That is a tough one because sometimes things are kind of a gray area on projects. How do you set those metrics and prepare for them and make them achievable?
Yeah. So, Dave, one of the things for me is all around intention. So you have to be intentional about what you want to create. And that can look different ways. So one that's maybe a little less metric driven, and then I'll get to the metric driven one. Another exercise of the book is the 5 intention setting questions. And so this is all part of the suiting up section of the book where it's saying, and this is one that like literally I use in my personal life all the time as well. Like these 5 intention setting questions are so versatile. They can be used in business context, personal context. I'm moving into a meeting. I'm starting a 12-month project. Like literally the scale can be so different. But there it's just really trying to understand like what does success look like and feel like? And so the 5 intention setting questions are, what do I not want to have happen? How do I not want to feel? What do I want to have happen? How do I want to feel? And how do I want others to feel? And who are those others? And so they're super simple questions. Yet when you answer them, and particularly when you start with a negative and sort of discharge, all that kind of gunk that's kind of clogging up your vision, like you really start to really get crisp about what does this really look like if I achieve whatever I'm about to step into? So it's more qualitative from a metric standpoint, but it's very collective in its sense making for that.
I would say for most people, change is difficult, whether it's in their personal lives or in the business world. As a leader, how do you manage change and manage your staff to buy into that change? Because inevitably there's going to be grumbling. And why are we doing it this way? Or, you know,
100%. 100%.
yes. So, how do we navigate that?
I always like to say everybody wants change, but nobody actually wants to change, right?
Right.
And it's because change, like you said, is hard. And so one of the things that was a big, I guess, revelation for me as I was writing Leading Through Free Fall, and I had never thought about it this way before, is that change is really a grief curve. And so anybody who has any type of change in their life is experiencing it as a grief curve. And so the very first step on that grief curve is denial or resistance in a business context, right? Some pushback. And then, goes to anger and then bargaining and then depression before you finally get to acceptance. And so as I had this realization and frankly now it's kind of just totally changed my consulting practice post writing the book, is to realize like when you're getting resistance and pushback, it actually is a good thing. It's telling you that you are pushing the bounds. So if, particularly like if you are a leader who is meant to be a change catalyst, if you are not actually receiving resistance, you should be asking yourself, are you pushing the organization far enough? Or are you just playing it too safe? Right. But from an individual perspective, the value of knowing that the change curve and this grief curve is just normal is it allows you to have a lot more grace with yourself of where you are in that and then the people that are also might be reacting to change in and around you. And so each individual is going to travel that grief curve, that change curve at different rates based on, just their comfort with ambiguity or lack thereof in an organizational setting, the scale of the initiative. If it's a huge initiative that has a lot of executive eyes on it, people are going to travel that curve a lot slower than if it's a, smaller project with fewer executive eyes on it, for instance. But just by recognizing and knowing that that there's this change curve, it totally changes the way that you can engage with it, because now it's not like, well, Dave has an issue with this project, or Dave has an issue with this, and therefore now I have a beef with Dave. It's more like, okay, Dave right now is on the anger side of this grief curve. So how do I meet Dave here and better understand and help him process how he's feeling, so that we can collectively move forward in the project in a way that makes Dave feel safe and engaged and heard, and we're also gaining forward momentum in the initiative.
My gosh, yeah, I feel like that's almost an epiphany that grief and change being side to side, even in a business standpoint, because I personally do not like change, you know, um, and to me, it's like I'm suddenly thinking back to circumstances and going, okay, that's totally makes sense.
Yeah, and when you know that, you can, like I in my profession where I'm essentially leading people through change day in and day out, and specifically change that they have asked for, right? They still go through this. And so there would be moments prior where it'd be like, well, they asked me to come in and do this. Like, why are they being so resistant? They have asked this for, right? Like there would be more of like this feelings of frustration and annoyance. And now I come to it with such a greater level of compassion, just to be like, okay, this is where they are. It's normal, it's predictable. And so at this moment, they are struggling. They're trying to, marginalize, what do we have to do? What do we not have to do? Like they're trying to make this decision, and so I can either choose to be frustrated and annoyed at them, which is not productive, or I can help them to understand that, sort of now being in maybe the bargaining phase of that grief curve, like what are the trade offs and the opportunity costs if they don't move, or if they do move, or if they move in a small way versus a big way. I can facilitate that conversation that allows them to air their concerns and their fear, but also see what they might be giving up if they don't take the big swing that's being asked of them in that moment. And that's not coming with a definitive you should do this, but it's just saying, I see you. I see you where you are. I understand where you are. But now let's process this together so that you can make an informed and therefore a confident decision of how you want to move forward, whatever it is that you decide. And it totally changes the dynamic of the team. And for me, it's just this realization has just made me a much better professional of really being able to support people through that change and transformation curve. So for me, in leading through free fall, people initially pick up the book because they get excited about the idea that, oh, there's 17 tools that I can apply immediately. That's going to help me to get more team alignment, more collaboration, et cetera. Right. So like those are the things that they kind of like, yes, okay, I want to buy the book for this. But one of the things that people keep telling me is that once they actually read the book and they start to apply the tools of the book, the thing that they get out of it is permission to be human in a space that generally has considered humanity a liability.
You do mention the 17 practical tools in the book. If a listener is managing a project right now and feels like they're imploding, they're in free fall, is there one right now you could say, here's one to at least give you some hope, give me, something to hold on to during that free fall until they can get your book?
I would say until they can get the book, I would do the 5 intention setting questions that I talked about to just get clear about what do you want in this moment. So, let's say, just hypothetically, you have a really difficult conversation to have with a leader. Like, let's say, one of your leaders is like, why are we doing this? Why is it taking so long? This is crap, like, whatever, right? Like, and you've got to go have a really difficult conversation with this leader. I would do those 5 intention setting questions before you get into that conversation to just get very ordered about what do you want to have come out of that. So, just for, easy access here, like, what do I not want to have happen in this conversation with this leader? How do I not want to feel during it? What do I want to have happen? How do I want to feel? And how do I want that leader to feel after this conversation? Right. So, like, that would help to ground to kind of start to move through the free fall. The book itself has really been designed intentionally where each chapter it can be standalone. And so that free fall that like it's not meant to be read from, cover to cover. And so the free fall section has all different things. So it could be like tame the skeptics, for instance. If you've got people who are like, I don't know why we're doing this. I don't know who you are doing it. Like there's a there's a exercise that you can do for that. The change of a timeline that I mentioned before. There's an exercise to support that. The loss of a leader exercise to support that. And so they're, in the free for if somebody were to have the book in front of them, then I would say read through the chapter titles of the free fall section and then ultimately choose the one that kind of resonates with you because they really are uniquely designed for specific challenges and then how to move through that challenge.
Is there a myth about modern leadership, particularly from your book, that could be debunked, that people think leadership means this, but it really isn't?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it kind of ties a little bit back to the doubt and fear question that you asked earlier, where I think we tell ourselves a good leader is a leader who can get projects to operate smoothly, or a good leader is a leader who doesn't receive pushback. And so when we receive these things, we either end up taking 2 points of view. One, if you're a person who kind of brings it in internally, then you start to question your own worth and your value and your competence as a leader. If you're a person who generally kind of does outward blame, then you start to get into an entitled perspective of like, well, who are they to question me? Right. But basically, we tell ourselves this story that in order to be a good leader, everything needs to be smooth. But the reality is that's just not going to happen. We already talked about the fact that this change curve, this grief curve is going to happen. Resistance is just a natural start on it. But then there's just going to be other things that happen that, you could never predict and you just kind of have to deal with it. And so the fact that it isn't predictable is one of the things to debunk. And then also the other thing to debunk is just recognizing that when you can come to things without having all of the answers and really collaboratively engage and co-create with people, which is a, key thread underneath these frameworks in this book, like you get to a much better outcome, not only for whatever you're trying to achieve, but a much better relational outcome that you're working with the people. So you have much more team cohesion and alignment, collaboration, which doesn't just serve the immediate thing that you're working on, it serves collectively everything that you work on. And so as a team, you're moving forward, you know, in alignment faster in more with more intention versus the alternative, which is the typical, we got to move fast, we don't have time to talk about what we need to do, and so everybody just needs to do, and then half of the stuff gets thrown out because it's not necessarily aligned to what needed to happen to begin with.
Just one last thing I want to ask you about is, how is leadership changing with technology, especially, and just our society norms have changed over the last 20 years. Things that were acceptable or were used 20, 30 years ago are not anymore. How, again, does a leader navigate that and move forward through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great question. And I think culturally, uh, we reward activity. Basically, if you're active, you are productive, which is, good, essentially. However, what oftentimes happens is the activity up at the beginning isn't actually questioned of whether it's productive activity or it's not. So you could be completely burnt out with busy activity that yields nothing in return versus sort of have lesser activity, but more intention behind that activity and have a lot of outcome. And so, one of the things that I've been doing just in helping to sort of get the book out there is I've been running workshops. And so one of the workshops that I've been running is called, elevate your leadership. And it's an opportunity for people to take a strategic pause is what I call it, a strategic pause to kind of take stock of their leadership style and what do they want to achieve. And one of the key things that I keep getting feedback on as after doing that workshop is I'm realizing that I'm putting a lot of energy out without actually the understanding of what the return or the payoff of that is going to be. And so, people are like, this exercise is helping me to really parse the signal from the noise, is how they're stating it, which I think is kind of interesting. But parse the signal from the noise. And so what people are just saying is like this strategic pause, which is like literally it's like an hour workshop, right? Like this strategic pause has made a tangible change in how I am now showing up with my teams and my stakeholders. Yet so often we don't give ourselves permission to just take an hour to invest in our own leadership because that hour could go into, 10 more emails or whatever it is. But when you think about it, like that hour, strategic pause for an hour has so much more return than just responding to 10 more emails or whatever it might be. But generally speaking, I don't think people give themselves permission for that. And frankly, I think with the rapid change of our work environments with AI, that's even less than it was before. There's this sense of like urgency like never before. And I think it's not only does it erode the impact that can be made, but it erodes, sort of the reserve, the energy reserve that leaders can have when they go into those situations too.
So, are you still doing these workshops? Can people take advantage of that?
Absolutely. So I'm doing them. If somebody is interested in joining the newsletter for leading through free fall, anything that's public, we make mention of that. And the best way to do that actually is maybe I'll offer to your listeners the opportunity to get a free chapter for leading through free fall. So if they go to leadingthroughfreefall.com/chapter 1, they'll be able to download, the first chapter, and then that'll automatically put them into the Leading Through Free Fall newsletter. So it's a little bit of bonus. They get a little taste of the book, plus the opportunity to become part of public workshops. And then if organizations want to hire me to bring me in to support that, I'm doing individual presentations as well. I've just recently done one for DHL Innovation Group and then the 1871 Innovation Incubator here in Chicago.
And the book available everywhere?
Everywhere where you could buy books. So, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever you can buy books online, you'll find Leading Through Free Fall all over the world.
Brianna Sylver, president of Sylver Consulting and author of Leading Through Free Fall. I feel like I learned a bunch of stuff today, and I hope our listeners did too. Thank you so much for being on Dave Wants to Know.
It is my pleasure. Thank you for wanting to know, Dave.
Again, thanks to our guest, Brianna Sylver from Sylver Consulting. You can get the first chapter of her book, Leading Through Free Fall, at leadingthroughfreefall.com/chapter 1. We thank you for tuning in to Dave Wants to Know. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time around.